Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast. I've got an awesome author and a poker educator, Duncan Palamourdas, on the line with me. Duncan teaches the mathematics of poker and poker education at UCLA. He's written great articles for awesome sites like Upswing, Poker News, Card Player, and he's written his first poker book, Why Alex Beats Bobbie at Poker. Thanks for joining, Alex. I said Alex. Thanks for joining, Duncan.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. Yes, no, Alex. I mean, we love Alex. I like to believe that I have a part of me in Alex. Although I like to think of her as the idealistic version. I like to think that part of me is in there. So that's a compliment, actually.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear. And I have to say that there's quite a bit of Bobbie in me still. I coach poker and I play and I'm a winning player. But some of that Bobbie action, I'm doing that occasionally on the felt.
All of us, for sure. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So just thank you very much once again for doing this interview with me. I appreciate it. Now,
thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Your book, you actually even signed it for me, and I really appreciate that. So when you become rich and famous, I've got a first edition signed book by you, Duncan. Yeah. But I really love this book, and you explain. It's pretty obvious you're a good educator, right? You're good at communicating your thoughts and your ideas. Haven't seen your actual presentation seminars and stuff, but via the written word, you really know your stuff. And I love how this book, so you're a math guy, but you don't overcomplicate things with crazy tough math. As you know, poker math is pretty simple, lots of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, but you didn't bog the book down with math, and you did something great, which was you took these two players, Alex and Bobbie. Alex at the top of her game, Bobbie just beginning, or maybe he's just kind of a losing player. Sure. But you gave so many real world relatable examples that really illustrated all of your points. First off, I just got to say it's an awesome book.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Coming from you, it's a big deal. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. How long did it take you to actually put together the book, or at least write up through the first draft, I guess?
Right. So the book itself did not take very long, but that was because I realized I was preparing for that book for many years, right? I mean, for at least since I started teaching 2014. So I've been writing notes, I've been preparing slides, and I was, trying to basically, if I were to summarize it in one word, the word would be noise reduction. I was trying to reduce the noise as much as possible. And often, basically, like you implied, a lot of the math, a lot of the numerical stuff is a lot of noise that can actually hinder the ability of the student to understand the concepts. And, I always take that as a compliment. When people are telling me, you don't look like a math guy, I take that as a compliment very much, because I'm trying to not necessarily hide it, but I'm trying to, it's the same thing that when we're speaking to any sort of specialist, whether it's, a doctor of some kind, a police officer, we usually, these people know a lot of technical jargon because it's their job, they're specialists. But the point is, we want to basically communicate the bottom line. So for me, it's all about communicating that bottom line. So I was trying to reduce as much noise as possible, get to the punchlines, without, of course, oversimplifying them. That's one of my favorite Einstein quotes, right? I mean, you have to make it as simple as possible, but not simpler than that, because at some point we're starting being a little bit too iffy. And so beginning in 2014, I started, the writing and the deleting, as I call it, like I write and delete. We don't need all of that stuff. Maybe we need some of it with that other stuff we don't need. Maybe need to rewrite and keep rewriting. But then when I put all of my notes together, funny side note, by the way, like I had a student with whom I communicated, realized later, all my emails with students, I found something like 200,000 words of emails of stuff. So all of that helped. But anyway, when I put everything together, it was a fairly short process. And by short, I mean, it took about half a year.
Oh, so, yeah, I got you.
Yeah, it's short. I mean, it's all relative, right? But it takes time and there was a lot of writing and rewriting and editing, and, I would keep edit the book at this point if I had it,
Yeah, I was the exact same way. Each of my books, printed, they were this big, but the first draft was maybe like this big, and you got to go in there, like they say, and kill your darlings and cut out as much of the fluff of the unnecessary stuff and leave the meat, leave what will really help the reader improve their game. And so, yeah, I understand that's a big thing. And like you said, like I could have not released my books and I could still be editing all of them to this day. When I open up, this is of course your book, but when I open up my own book and I look at it, I can cut this, I can change this, I can use a different picture here but you just got to eventually say, forget this, we're done. It's ready to go out. It's not perfect, but it's like 95% there,
Sure, for sure. And there's always, more things we could, please go ahead.
No, go ahead. There's more.
Oh, I was about to say there's always more things we can do on later editions or on newer books. I mean, I've been reading your work, like your work for years, as I've mentioned before, and I've seen what you're talking about. Like I can see the level of editing that goes into your work. I mean, I can tell if someone who's written text on their own, they know that this has been worked meticulously.
Yeah, without a doubt. But I do have one question for you. When I pull up your book on Amazon, I do not see an audiobook version. Are you going to release this as an audiobook?
Right. So initially my publisher said, yeah, let's go and do this. And then COVID happened. Oh. So there was a little bit of implications. So ideally, yes. So as long as, I was debating on whether, because I'm not a native speaker. I mean, I've been in the US for a long time. Most people don't have issues, understanding my English anymore or my accent, I should say. But it was one of my concerns. At the same time, I feel that there is a certain level of, I guess I can call it intonation, certain level of passion and enthusiasm, which I would rather be me to make all the mistakes than having somebody else and be, responsible for them. So I would like to do because my publisher wanted to have an audiobook, and it wanted me to be the one who does the recording. And I was a little bit skeptical at first, but after all of the, dust settles, I'm interested in doing it. Are you into audiobooks, Sky, yourself?
Yes, love audiobooks. Especially for fictional stuff, because it's so easy to just listen and not have to think and turn my brain off and just, right. enjoy the fiction. But for books, especially books like yours, poker books like yours, this is a really good, like, if I had the audiobook as well as, I got the paperback, but reading the whole paperback, taking notes, taking action with the stuff that you teach, and then occasionally listening to chapter 3 again, chapter 8, which is one of my favorite chapters. I think it was called Give a Man a Fish and He May Turn Into One. Great chapter on fundamentals. But
thank you.
So reading it once is great. You learn through the written word, take notes and everything, but then hearing it over and over again, just while I'm doing laundry, doing the yard or whatever, it's going to help reinforce those things. And I love your publisher's idea of you reading it. It's always best when the author reads his own work, maybe not for fiction, but for nonfiction, without a doubt, because these are your words. And like you had said, you're going to hit the right intonation. You're going to emphasize the things that should be emphasized. When some Joe Schmo just reading it, maybe he doesn't even understand poker, reading it, it's not going to be as true or as useful as it could be, I think.
I'll take your advice to heart. I'm going to start pushing a little bit more on this again when things, get a little bit cool down, because right now it's a little bit a weird situation. But yeah, for sure.
I gotcha. And speaking of COVID, what is teaching like at UCLA right now? Are you even teaching any classes?
Right. It has been a little bit weird to say the least. Some of poker is not going to be exactly top priority because the classes that I'm actually teaching are electives. So some of them were temporarily, postponed. But I mean, we're getting back there. I mean, we're going to use the good old Zoom to do it, because at first people were like, we don't know how long this is going to last. And, I like to do things hands-on. Like I have, students usually sit around a table and, we're discussing things hands-on. And it's part of the reason why people usually come to the class. And that obviously we couldn't do that remotely. But yeah, we'll get there. I mean, we're getting back to these classes for sure.
Definitely good. I'm glad to hear that. I would imagine you prefer teaching in person
for sure,
as opposed. Yeah. Good. So I just mentioned chapter 8, Give a Man a Fish and He May Turn Into One. And this really, if there's one chapter that I think is most important, like every chapter, the chapters build upon each other. You talk about stuff in chapter 10 that you mentioned in chapter 2, like you got to read the whole book. But if there's one chapter for anybody who doesn't have a lot of time, willing to read, I think chapter 8 is it, because you cover all the fundamentals, all the most important things, like the low-hanging fruit that poker players, especially losing players, if you're Bobby and you're not making any money, everyone seems to be exploiting you, and you have a really good part, a really good section in your book where you talk about Alex and Bobbie are both playing the exact same hands. Alex is playing them smarter, so her bankroll is staying this big through the session. As the session goes, Bobbie is depleting, but they both get pocket aces at the end of the session. She makes this much money, he makes this much because of his skills, right? Bobbie is here. So if you listening or watching this on YouTube, if you're a Bobbie, chapter 8 is the one that you need above all the others, I think.
Sure. Excellent. No, that's great, and it's one of the chapters that I got a lot of feedback and people, because I initially it's funny that you mentioned that, because that was one of the chapters that was missing from the book, and people were like, well, Duncan, I mean, you don't have like a specific, a clear-cut strategy. You always talk about ideas. Sometimes we have to be practical. We have to include that, and I didn't want to sound I didn't want to sound preachy. That's one of the things that I do not like at all, because I don't view myself necessarily as a teacher. I view myself more, and I've mentioned that before, kind of like, I don't know how to put it, but more of like, kind of like co-discoverer of the subject or the truth or whatever it is, and I just happen to be more experienced. That's why they give me the so-called teaching position. So it's very, very difficult for me to sit in there and I to say, oh, you should absolutely do this or do that, right? So that was one chapter, and I think that was kind of like chapter 8, which is basically Alex's entire strategy. I emphasize that on the book. That's Alex's strategy, and she has very good reason to follow that. That's not preaching everybody else to go and be like Alex, right? I mean, if they see things that, it matches their personalities and stuff, they can follow it. But also another thing that I'm sure but by the way you're talking about it, you realize that yourself is not necessarily that I'm talking down on Bobbie, right? Because Bobbie, you mentioned earlier, you have a little bit of Bobbie in yourself. I do too. Like, I mean, Bobbie likes to play for fun, and there's nothing wrong to play poker for fun. Actually, a lot of my students come to the class because they want to play for fun. So what I'm saying is, why people who prioritize, let's say, fun over making money typically tend to lose money. That's why Bobbie loses money to Alex, but there's nothing wrong with that, because again, he more than compensates for that by, again, having fun, having a good time at the casino. So that's, in my book, it's a win-win situation. Otherwise, Bobbie wouldn't come back. Bobbie's not an idiot. Like, he's potentially very successful in other areas of life, and he keeps going back to the casino. He knows that, he loses money. Why does he come back? Because he enjoys the game. But so yeah, that's not a preachy chapter to come to a conclusion. It's just Alex's strategy, and I'm trying to explain why she chooses that strategy.
Yep, absolutely. I love that reasoning behind it. And for myself, when I'm coaching students and like they play live games or even home games, and there's a lot of limping and a lot of passive play, I don't tell them you cannot play that way. Like, that is not profitable poker. It's fun if it works for you. And if you're at a situation where, you're playing with your friends and your family, you don't want to be the guy pounding on them with aggression all the time. You've got to be the one, you got to be mixing it up and playing hands the way they do, just to keep the peace. And it's a friendly game, but maybe when you play online poker and the goal is to make money and improve your strategies, that's when you want to follow a little bit more Alex and like leave the Bobbie behind as much as possible.
For sure. No, that excellently put. Yep.
One last thing just about the book itself.
For sure.
I've always preached that limping is a terrible play. And I generally teach my opponents, or not my opponents, my students, that it's limping by looking at their database, and we pull up all their limping hands and we see that win rate, and that's losses, or the positive win rate is very small. But every time you raise over limpers, or every time you raise first in, you're like winning a ton of money. And that's how I always, I guess, explained how limping is bad. But I love how on page 236, I made a special note of this because I absolutely loved your story or analogy or whatever it's called. Yeah. The hidden costs of limping, right? Limping is not like cheaper than raising. You even said junk food is cheaper than healthy food, but there's those hidden costs, the unhealthy consequences of that cheaper food. And I thought that was a perfect explanation. Can you dive a little bit more into that limping is bad kind of aspect? For sure.
Limping has been one of those things that I've been trying to understand and dissect for a long time, right? I mean, this is me trying, first of all, to answer to myself, like, why is it bad, right? I mean, I can see it from data, like, that limping actually performs worse than raising. And I think it struck me when I was in Vegas during the WSOP. Funny enough, I didn't play the WSOP. I played the cash games on the side. Because And I was staying at Holiday Royale, which has a lot of poker players. I don't know if you've been to Vegas during that time of the year, but there's this like a nice, affordable, because it's a business trip, so we have to minimize expenses, at least in my eyes. So, and there's a lovely lady there. Her first name is Kathy. And I asked her, Kathy, it was one of my actually first times in Vegas. And I said, okay, I mean, I'm going to be around in Vegas a lot, during the night and during, off business hours. Do you have any advice for me? And then, without skipping a beat, Kathy, lovely lady, always a smile on her face. She's like, Duncan, it's very simple. Act like you belong. And that phrase, I didn't realize it at the time, but I mean, it struck me because what she basically said to me, she's first of all, she said, do not act in fear, because fear would actually attract predators of some sort, right? And but at the same time, what is implicit in her advice is don't go guns blazing. Like you're in Vegas. I mean, don't try to act like you belong, but don't go crazy about it. Don't try to again, you're going to get arrested. And that reminded me, that's exactly what raising is, right? Raising before the flop. We don't go all in. As a first-person raiser, right? I mean, that would be going guns blazing, right? I mean, we just raise to 3 times the big blind or 4, whatever it is, right? And the equivalent of limping would be being fearful, right? So the sweet spot, so to speak, would be we're showing that we belong here. We like our hand. We're raising big enough to make a statement. So if people want to play, they're going to have to pay. But at the same time, we don't go crazy by risking our entire stack. We're not making an overstatement. We're not making an overstatement. We're not making an understatement. We're just making a statement. And that statement is, I like my hand. And it started built from there. Then there were actually the hidden costs of limping that you're referring to is the idea that, okay, so what does it's not so much the issue of that limping is quote unquote bad, but why would raising would be a better alternative, right? And I'm exploring some of these ideas. And again, I don't want to get into too big of tangents, but very quickly some of these ideas. So the classic example would be, let's say we're in a very deep game and we have the button, our favorite, right? And a bunch of people limp before us, like limp, 3, 4 limpers before us, and then we have a playable hand on the button, like let's say something like Ace-5 of hearts or something on the button, and we want to play that hand. Now, a lot of people would be inclined to say, this is a hand that plays really nice, multi-way, I might limp behind, I have position, and they wouldn't be wrong. I mean, it's profitable to limp behind and then let the blinds come. What I would argue, however, even if we assume that all players, let's say, automatically call, like they never fold the hand, I would argue it's still more profitable to put a raise in there. Why would it be potentially more profitable? At least, why is it worth considering? Because let's say that we put a raise and our opponents would not think, like they would call with their entire range. So instead of now having, let's say, we go a 5-way to a multi-way pot for 1 blind each, let's say both the blinds call, so let's say there's a pot of 5 blinds, now we go into a pot that has 15 blinds. And what's the benefit there? I mean, we just bloated the pot, right? How couldn't that be good? Well, for starters, our opponents are now more inclined to check to us. So because we raised before the flop, there might be a little bit less of donk betting. Incidentally, I really like your article about the donk betting that you wrote recently. That reminded me. Yep. Very, very, very interesting that you talk about. But the fact that we raised may make it ever so slightly less likely for them to make a betting. Also, the fact that we raised before the flop keeps our range uncapped. That's a little bit of the more slight thing, right? So we can represent aces and kings at any point if we wanted to. So we have these extra benefits, and ever so slightly, that increases our equity. So what is like, if I were to, I usually avoid, putting a numerical value to those things, but the way I like to think of it is as a pizza, as a pie, let's say. So we have a pie. If the pie is 5 blinds, and we put 1 blind in, as long as we get that 1 blind back, as long as we get at least 20%, we're happy, right? Because we get our money back. If we get 30%, we made a little bit of profit. Now, if the pie is 15 and we get 20%, the same equity, we still break even. It doesn't matter that the pie is bigger. It doesn't matter that there's more money in the middle. We're still breaking even. So the question is, if our equity, let's say, goes from 20% by limping on the button, which is probably going to be a little bit more than that, but for the sake of the argument, let's say, it goes from 20% to 25%. What would we rather have? 20% of 5 blinds, or would we rather have 25% of 15 blinds? Right? So that increase, actually, because the pot is bigger, any extra is going to be for extra money. So as long as we're not playing scared money, this is going to be profitable. And I would argue that this is what I, in the book I'm calling the initiative, like being aggressive adds extra value. Even if it's for 1% or 2%, people are going to be a little bit more intimidated by that raise.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. I love that. And that's one of the things I always try to teach my students: no more limping, not even in the small blind when it gets limped to you. And I'm guilty of it. The other day I was on a group coaching call with some of my students, and we were talking about limping and how to exploit limpers. And then one of the students says, "Sky, do you ever limp?" And I said, "No, I never limp." And I had Poker Tracker 4 open. So let me show you. And I filtered for limping. And out of the past year, I've had 7 limps in the small blind. I preach no limping, and I think I never limp, but maybe sometimes that perfect hand comes along, and I think limping is a good play. But for the most part, yes, I agree with you. And there's so many hidden costs, and it is so much better when you're that pre-flop raiser, like you were saying, you have fold equity. Even if you assume all 4 other players are going to call, invariably somebody folds. You got them out of the pot. So maybe now you can win this 20 or 30 instead of the 25% of the time, as you said. And then that post-flop initiative, such a critical thing. And you talk about something also in the book called the poker trifecta. And I really like that a lot. I've never heard of it talked about that way. I always talk about the 3 advantages: the positional advantage, range advantage, and which you talk about both of those, but then you also talk about the initiative advantage. And I talk about a skill advantage, which is kind of less quantifiable than the initiative, but talk a little bit about that initiative advantage that you can have pre-flop or via your actions pre-flop.
For sure. So what I was trying to understand there, so to give a little bit background to your listeners, I tried to take a step back, and I was trying to understand what I call innate properties of the game. And by what I mean innate properties of the game, I usually give them the metaphor of chess, because it's a little bit to understand there. In chess, which is essentially kind of like a battle, some sort of race, we can think of that as a race game to get to the opponent's king and capture the opponent's king. The white pieces always go first. So, and because it's kind of a race game, people are trying to kill their opponent. I'm using that in quotes, of course. No pieces, real or otherwise, are getting harmed in this episode. So, but what happens in chess, it turns out after huge databases, all else being equal, the white pieces have a teeny tiny advantage, about 2 or 3%. So the person who plays first has a little bit of an advantage. So I was trying to, all else being equal, putting the skill aside, which is actually a very important factor, obviously. Like, I'm just putting the skill factor aside for a second. I was trying to see what are some innate properties of the game, like some properties that if you completely gave us no information, would we have enough information by looking at those innate properties to bet on some person? For example, if you showed me two chess players battling each other out and I knew nothing about them, it would be a profitable bet to bet even money on the person who has the white pieces.
Makes sense,
right?
Yeah.
So makes sense, right? So I was like, is there any way to do the same thing for poker, right? Is there any way to I can look at a table, I don't know nothing about people, I cannot even look at their faces, who's there to have fun by the way they dress and stuff like that, which are a lot. I'm talking about that stuff also in the book. And it turns out the trifecta is exactly that, is the idea that, innately, people who have position, card advantage, and finally initiative tend to be more profitable, and all else being equal. In particular, initiative is the hardest thing to justify and also to talk about. And it goes, again, hand in hand with your question earlier before about limping, right? Because a lot that goes into that raise versus limping is the fact that there is initiative. And what that does is is the idea that it creates, sometimes people call that fear equity, jokingly, right? It creates, and it's not, it's a little bit more than that, just psychological, that is. The idea that we keep ranges uncapped, for example, is very important. The fact that our opponents always have to worry that maybe we had aces and that's why we raised, is actually, it's very relevant. It creates the concept of the range advantage and the nut advantage and all of these technical things that we can get into. So it invokes more checks. It invokes more passive play by our opponents, and correctly so, because we are representing a stronger range. And also, another issue with this is that it makes it harder and more expensive for our opponent to tell a story, because and put a re-raise, let me say, because essentially the way I like to think of poker is that the first person that calls is the first person that flinches. That's how I like to see it. So go, yeah. You see what I mean, right? It's like we're having kind of like I don't know what happens today with all of the dark analogies, but a fight is ready to start, and then basically the first person who I think actually it's there's a better example that doesn't have to get violent. There is a really nice example from the Selfish Gene from Richard Dawkins, and he's talking about this idea. It's actually embedded in our in our evolutionary genetics. The idea that there's a specific type of birds that actually have exactly this contest, right? So it's actually really costly for them to attack, because they may die, they may get incapacitated, and they're not able to reproduce. So they have this, the first person who flinches just goes away, and then the other person keeps the territory. So there's basically a battle, oh, I'm bigger than you, no, I'm bigger than you, no, I'm bigger than you. And then at some point somebody says, okay, yes, you're bigger than me, so I'm going to walk away. So this is little dance. So I feel that the raise and re-raise before the flop, it's the same dance. Mm-hmm. I have the best hand. No, you're not. You're not, Alex. Me, Bobby, I have a better hand, and I'll prove it by putting more raise. No, Mr. Bobby, I have a better hand. I'm going to prove it with a re-raise. So in a certain sense, the first person that's calling, basically they're signaling that my hand is not strong enough to re-raise, and actually that translates into the ranges, because again, typically people who have the best hand, they often more often than not, they opt, even if they slow play, sometimes they go for the re-raise. Mm-hmm. So that call is what I like to call, they give information by what they not do. And what they didn't do is they didn't raise. So the person who calls doesn't raise, so they are flinching first. And I think there is a non-flinching advantage in poker that translates into ranges.
I love that. And that's what the initiative is, that non-flinching advantage. Your opponent called, they showed a bit of weakness. You're the one with the strength with the aces and kings. Correct. I love that. Good explanation there. Now, when it comes to a lot of the listeners right now, or viewers on YouTube, they might be saying, and the whole idea behind the book is Alex is a better player than Bobbie, and these are all the things that she does that takes chips from Bobbies and players like him. If somebody's watching this right now or listening, and they are a losing player, if they would consider themselves a Bobbie versus an Alex, but they want to get to the Alex level, what do you think is the first thing that they need to do to start improving those skills and start getting better results?
For sure. There is one theoretical thing that I'm going to say, and there's several practical things. The theoretical thing that I'm going to say, because again, I don't mean to sugarcoat it, is that, you win something, you lose something. There's always a trade-off in life, right? And the thing that the so far losing player needs to consider is that one way or another, they may have to sacrifice part of the fun, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is that I'm not saying that, like when I play poker, I have fun, right? It's not like poker is not fun, but I'm saying that if, for example, they play because they really want to hit that one outer, or really they want to give somebody bad beats, which does happen, right? This is a specific type of fun that people like to have, to give, better players bad beats, and they enjoy that. Mm-hmm. But if this is the sort of thing that they enjoy, they should be ready to understand that, they may have to make sacrifices like that. There's certain hands that, no matter what strategies they come up with, there's always going to be things that they cannot do. So there's going to be some sacrifice of fun. So they will another way of putting it is they will have to prioritize profitability over fun. So if they're in a spot where profitability and having fun are at odds, they will always have to choose profitability. So that would be the theoretical aspect, which surprisingly, is a thing that a lot of people not necessarily think about, right? They go into the practical stuff right away. In terms of practical things, I mentioned earlier noise reduction. I'm a big proponent of that idea. I would try at the beginning, to keep it very, very simple and very, very simple. I mentioned that in the book. If you want to keep one practical idea, just think of the trifecta. Play fewer hands with initiative and position. If you can, for example, I know this is obviously people who, are thinking of more advanced strategies and GTO and stuff, but we're not talking about that stuff. We're talking about beginner players, right? We're talking about, and so a beginner player, again, advice, quote unquote advice, they can obviously do whatever they want. But my thought would be start simple. Start with simple ideas. So for example, what would that be in practice? Let's say that a classic example, they raise from middle position with a good raising hand, but not a premium hand. Somebody re-raises them. Calling would force them to be out of position without the initiative and without potentially card advantage. Just don't think about it. Just fold that hand, right? There is, in a more advanced player, there will be a lot of things, we can 4-bet as a bluff. we can forget about that at the beginning, right? Just let go of a hand. If you don't have initiative position and card advantage, just move to the next hand. Surprisingly, that shift alone can do a lot for the bottom line. And also surprisingly, it's much harder than it sounds because it does require sometimes that you don't play hands for long periods of time. And that can be frustrating for people.
Yeah, for sure. One of those sacrifices when you start tightening up and you go for that trifecta more and more, or as often as possible, is you're right. You are folding a ton of hands, but you got into poker because you wanted to play poker. You want to see the flop. You want to hit 2 pair. You want to hit a flush draw and nail it on the turn. They get max value out of your opponent on the river. You want that. But you're right. That's a really good not general, but a really important idea. Profitable poker, and I've heard Alex Fitzgerald talk about this and a lot of other people. Profitable poker can be pretty boring poker, because you're just doing a ton of folding. If the most profitable way to play is only playing, just to choose a round number, V-pipping 20% of the time on average, well then you're folding the other 80%, right? So 4/5 of your time at the table, fold, fold, fold. That's all you're doing over and over again. Can get boring. And I like how you got to be willing to sacrifice that fun for profits. And if you're not willing to, great, go ahead and keep playing, being the Bobbie that you want to be. Sure. As long as you're enjoying it.
Absolutely.
Then, hey,
absolutely.
Yeah, do what you do. It's players like Bobbie that makes poker profitable for the rest of us that want to become like Alex out there.
Correct.
And a couple other questions for you. Let's see here. Recently on Twitter, you are at Ask the Math Dr for Doctor, Ask the Math Doctor. You said this: in a no limit heads up battle, would you rather have the button every hand versus a heads up specialist, or be out of position every hand against a recreational player? Now, the polls came back, 65% said I would take on the recreational player from out of position. But I want to know, Duncan, what would you choose?
Oh, man, yeah. So this is something that I thought about it. Obviously, to be fair, it will depend, how good that professional is. But I think having the button is such an incredible advantage personally, because I've actually, heads up is actually my game. I used to play a lot online before. I transitioned to live, but personally, I would take the button, because I think having the button every time is such an important advantage that I don't think any skill differential can overcome that. So by that, and that's actually a very bold statement. So there might be people who disagree with me, but I would say I would take, to put my money where my mouth is, I would take any winning professional player, and by winning I mean any player who has the fundamentals down, and I bet the money on them against any player in the world if they have the button in every hand. So
Nice.
I would take that bet. And the reason for that is because I do think that the button is such an incredible advantage that no skill, I mean, there are some skill differentials, of course. I mean, if you know, we have the somebody who is, it's difficult, let's say world class versus somebody who just learned the game, for sure. The person who just learned the game, probably they're not going to be able to use the button to full advantage. I mean, they're not going to be doing a lot of raising, take advantage of that. They're going to be doing a lot of limping and things like that. But a winning professional poker player, I think, is a favorite against anybody in the world, heads up, if they have the button in every hand.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would take the button as well. As long as that world-class heads-up player is willing to play me at my stake. I mean, I'm not going to play 200 NL versus, with my bankroll or anything, 400, 1,000 NL. But if he's willing to be a 25 NL, I'll take him on if I get the button every single time. In the book, in the very beginning, you talk about, you in the acknowledgement section, which maybe a lot of readers don't read acknowledgements. Oh, the author's thanking these people. I don't care. I'm never going to know them. But I always read it because I'm an author myself and I want to know who they're thanking. But in the book, you talk about your friend Sasha, who read the book and created a little pamphlet, and then which helped I think it was your wife, right?
Correct. Yes.
Helped your wife play winning poker.
Correct.
And I was kind of expecting throughout the book, maybe at the end of the book or something, maybe I missed it at some point. I was thinking you might offer us that pamphlet if, signing up to your newsletter or something. I mean, if that pamphlet helped your wife who never played poker become winning, I would love to see that pamphlet. For
sure. Now, maybe pamphlet. I don't know if it was a poor choice of word, but what I meant is that she actually, when, how manuscripts this day and age, they're basically PDFs, right? So she took this manuscript and then she actually turned it into a booklet. So she printed it out essentially. That's what I meant by pamphlet. But the funny thing is that, because I mean, it's difficult for people to read manuscripts, and my wife, who is actually a voracious reader, she actually took that booklet and she read it. She hadn't played poker before, and she went and she actually, very proud of her. She won a tournament in Vegas. She actually, here in LA, she played one of the yearly tournaments over at Hustler, and she did really well. She came, I believe, like 23rd out of 1,000 people or something. That was pretty. Yeah, I was pretty happy about her, and it felt good. At least there were some ideas that were able to resonate with people. That maybe if I mean, obviously I'm biased. She's my wife. I love her to death. So
yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. When I read that, I just immediately thought like your friend Sasha turned into like a 20-page condensed version of this is what you need to know. So that's what I guess. I was just kind of hoping to see that myself.
That's another good advice, by the way. I have to take that into heart. So try to maybe create something like that, like a bottom line.
So I know this book is this took you 6 months to kind of put together. Of course, it was built off your whole career of teaching poker and everything. But do you have ideas for future books? Or are you going to create a YouTube channel and start teaching via video? I mean, what's the plan from this point forward now that your book is out there?
Right. Now that's a great question. I've been thinking about it a lot, and this is actually, obviously, like I'm teaching math also, like I'm doing research. So there's other things that I have, but content creation is something that I've really seriously considered, and basically, some things that. I'm thinking about is perhaps, write something about some lessons, life lessons from poker sessions, things that, can, this is something that I was thinking about, and vice versa, how life applies to poker, poker applies to life. And as for content creation, yes, I mean, it depends really. To be honest with you, for me, the most important fact is I just want to get the ideas out there, start a conversation. So it really, I mean, it's again, I mean, I have a kind of like, so to speak, I don't know if you would call it like a regular job. I'm technically an academic. I mean, I'm doing research, I'm doing math. I love poker. I spend a lot of time. This is kind of a passion project for me, which I spend a lot of time for a passion project. I probably more north of like 20 hours a week on a poker, obviously these days. And it depends really on the reaction. So if people are interested and there is a conversation, I'm more than happy to do that. But for me, it's just a conversation, like try to see if, some people people can be helped about it from it. Try to, again, I like to view myself as a co-discoverer of, a communicator more than anything else. I have a communication discussion with people.
Good. Yeah. I would love in the future, if you do decide to get into content creation, I would definitely be into it. I'd be following you from the get. And this was a really good book. I highly recommend everybody listening and watching right now. You've got to pick it up. Why Alex Beats Bobbie at Poker by Duncan Palamourdas. Duncan, I appreciate you spending this time with me and my audience. It was great talking to you. And I'm really looking forward to continue learning from you and everything that you have out there.
Absolutely, I appreciate that too. And just as a closing question, because again, I mean, you ask all these lovely questions. I just wanted to ask you what's on your mind recently. What is something that you're thinking a lot about lately? What is like one of the top ideas poker-wise that's on your mind?
Post-flop aggression. I've talked a ton about, I talked and taught and podcasts and everything, a ton about pre-flop aggression, right? And avoiding that pre-flop passivity. And I've talked quite a bit about making that initial C bet, a little bit on donk betting, but I want to get more into check raising in position. I want to teach students more about just getting aggressive, earning more pots, earning more value out of your good value hands. That's where I am headed. So over the next few months, you're going to see a lot more aggressive content out of me, whether it's videos on YouTube, in the Poker Forge, podcasts, articles on the website. So that's what I'm into. What about you? What are you into right now, poker-wise?
Poker-wise, I think probably like the idea of the concept of noise reduction is something that is really in my head. I'm trying to see, where a noise reduction can be applicable. But what you just said reminded me of this other idea of I like to give visuals to my students. Go big or go home. It's like, we shouldn't be playing many hands if we want to keep a simple strategy, right? I mean, one noise reduced strategy would be not be involved in many pots, but if we decide to be involved, we're there to fight, and then go big or go home. I like this. So I like that you're talking about post-flop aggression. That's amazing. So I'll keep following and see where you go with it. So yeah, I mean, I'm your follower on Twitter, as you know, so I like that stuff for sure.
Good, thank you. And I think go big or go home, that was a big part of your final chapter in the book, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm talking about that as well. Yeah, and it's and also like the towards the end, I mean, I'm talking about the idea of like how important are fundamentals, and sometimes we get, especially this day and age, and you may have heard me otherwise talking about the idea that I'm a little bit skeptical, and when I say skeptical, I should be very careful how to phrase this, but I think people they may overestimate the usefulness of solvers, and I've been publicly, as someone who like I'm technically that's something that I do understand, mathematics and and computer science, but yeah, that's maybe a topic for another day. But I really do appreciate you having me here. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun as well. And just one last thing, because you said
please,
you said it a couple of times.
I'm happy.
Feel good. You said minimizing the noise, and that just reminds me of one of my new favorite sayings, JOMO, the joy of missing out, right?
I love it.
Yeah, for all of us poker learners, there's so many videos on YouTube, so many websites. Maybe we're a member of a poker training site, so many podcasts to listen to, try to learn from. We get overwhelmed by so much poker content out there, right? So I've been pushing my students toward the idea of JOMO, joy of missing out. And just whatever your strategy is right now, you want to become a better 3-bet bluffer. You want to use your HUD better. You want to raise C bets to bluff players off hands. Whatever that is, focus everything around that. If Duncan doesn't talk about it in his book, don't read Duncan's book. I mean, I recommend to read Duncan's book, but
I agree. I would agree with you 100%.
Is, whatever it is, and he doesn't talk about it, and if in my podcast this week I don't talk about it, don't listen to the podcast. Stay tuned on the one thing that you're focused on. Find a video, an article, a chapter from Duncan's book that relates exactly to it. Spend all your time studying that, taking action upon that, and ignore everything else. No new shiny objects. I don't care which poker content creator creates something that seems amazing that you can use. No. That's just all noise, like you had said. And try to reduce that as much as possible. So JOMO for the win.
JOMO, I love it. I'm going to quote you that because I think I'm going to use it in my classes. So you're going to get credit for that because, academics will always need to give credit to people.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
Excellent.
So once again, Duncan, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And one last word for everybody. Oh, one last word from me. You've got to read Why Alex Beats Bobbie at Poker. And I will be the first one to purchase your audiobook when it comes out, Duncan.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you're welcome. And just in closing, where can people go to learn more from you, to start a conversation with you?
For sure. Probably the easiest place will be the Twitter that you mentioned earlier. Ask the Math DR on Twitter. A little bit of a pretentious title. I apologize for that, but that's actually my website, and that was the only URL I found at the time. So every time I mention that, I feel the need to apologize because I couldn't find something. I guess I could have tried to find Duncan Palamourdas, but I wanted to do something related to math. So, but anyway, so yeah, anytime.
Right. Good. All right. Thank you very much, Duncan. We'll catch you later.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.